For more than 2 decades, Maura Murray's family has not stopped thinking about the road in New Hampshire where she went missing. And in all honesty, neither can the true crime community. When Maura Murray went missing, Facebook was just 5 days old. Bill Jensen, a true crime writer and journalist, explained why the 2004 case is still fascinating 20 years on. On the internet, Maura's disappearance is the perfect obsession, a puzzle of clues that offers a tantalizing illusion. If the right armchair detective connects the right dots, maybe the unsolvable can be solved. And so every day the case attracts new recruits, analyzing and dissecting and reconstructing the details of her story with a Warren Commission-like fervor. Welcome to Bad Things, and our deep dive into the disappearance of Maura Murray. Join us as we relive the timeline of events, the theories that have surfaced over the years, and what we at Bad Things think most likely happened to the missing woman. Let us start off with a look at the timeline of this famous cold case. Maura Murray was born to Fred and Lori Murray on May 4, 1982, in Brockton, Massachusetts. Maura grew up in Hanson, a small suburb on Massachusetts' South Shore, in a working-class household with plenty of love and support from her siblings, Fred Jr., sisters Kathleen and Julie, and younger half-brother Curtis. Her parents divorced when she was 6, and Maura would primarily live with her mother after the divorce. Maura was an overachieving student who excelled in both academics and athletics. She was active in her community, becoming well known for her compassionate heart, distinctive dimples, and stunning smile. She competed in virtually all sports available to her, including competitive AAU basketball, which enabled her to travel extensively around New England as a teenager. A resilient competitor, Maura frequently finished among the top runners in the state and broke numerous long-standing school records. Maura made the Boston Globe All-Scholastic in cross-country and qualified for the United States National Scholastic Outdoor Championships in the 2-mile as a sophomore in 1998, placing 33rd in the nation. She graduated at the top of her class from Whitman-Hanson Regional High School and had her pick of academic and athletic colleges. However, she chose to accept a congressional nomination from the late Senator Edward Kennedy and joined her sister Julie at the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point. Maura continued to flourish in West Point's demanding military and academic programs, establishing herself as a force on the cross-country and track teams. However, Maura felt the military was not for her during her second year at West Point, so she switched to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst to pursue a career in nursing. Maura's sudden move to the University of Massachusetts from West Point may seem like a normal change of direction while studying, as many college-age students do, but in Maura's case, it looks like she had no choice. Although Maura seemed to have everything going for her, she was in trouble. Maura was charged with theft in August 2001, while at West Point after shoplifting cosmetics from a Fort Knox shop. The commanding officer ordered an honorary investigation hearing, implying they had enough evidence against her to put her on trial in front of the Cadet Advisory Committee. The Council of Honor suggested removing Maura from the Cadet Corps. This suggestion was sent to the superintendent, who was expected to make a decision by the end of January 2002. However, on January 2, 2002, Maura formally transferred from West Point, most likely to escape expulsion, which would have been on her permanent record. Transferring to the University of Massachusetts should have been a fresh start for Maura, but according to a Freedom of Information Act request for files pertaining to interviews with those who knew her, Maura seemed to be in a downward spiral. According to the documents, none of Maura's nursing student peers claimed to have a close connection with her, and most of her dorm mates told police they barely knew her enough to say hello. Her classmates viewed her as withdrawn, reserved, and quiet, and she struggled to fit in on campus. The documents also indicated that Maura was suffering from bulimia, something her family had been aware of for some time. The files just confirm everything that we already knew. It confirms that Maura was struggling, she had an eating disorder, and she was making poor decisions, and we knew that, Julie Murray would say. Maura's roommate at West Point, Megan Sawyer, corroborated this when speaking to James Renner when she said, You could tell there were some inner demons. She seemed sad. She had issues with bulimia. If she wanted to make up another life, she could do it. If she wanted to disappear, she could. I believe she's alive. It's just a feeling I've always had. Maura was also having relationship issues with her long-distance boyfriend, Bill Roche. Maura's relationship with alcohol was routinely looked into by investigators during the early stages of the investigation, with some students who knew her telling detectives that she drank no more than the average college student, while others claimed she could turn into a different person when she drank and was frequently seen alone on campus carrying groceries and alcohol to her room. With all these personal problems starting to mount up, Maura would once again run afoul of the law. In November 2003, Maura was caught using stolen credit card details. Maura used discarded receipts to get credit card information and ordered pizza with them. She escaped punishment for this serious charge by getting a literal slap on the wrist of 3 months probation. By February 2004, Maura's life began unraveling within a matter of days. Maura had started working as an on-campus security officer at her university to make a few extra dollars while at university. On Thursday, February 5th at 10:20 p.m., Maura spoke on the phone with her sister Kathleen. In 2017, Kathleen said they talked about Kathleen's fiancé on that call. Kathleen, a recovering alcoholic, had been released from a treatment facility that evening, and on the way home, her fiancé took her straight to a liquor store, resulting in her having an emotional breakdown and relapse. 10 minutes later at 10:30 p.m., Maura began crying while on shift. When her supervisor asked whether something was wrong, Maura just shook her head. He then asked whether there had been a family emergency, to which Maura replied no, nothing to do with me. The supervisor inquired further, asking what the call was about. She started crying and muttering words under her breath that I could not understand, the supervisor said. I asked her again, telling her I was worried about her, and she said, "No reason to leave, it's my sister, not me." I asked her if something happened to her sister, and she responded, "It's my sister's problem, not mine," and started shaking visibly while crying silently. The supervisor was so concerned about Maura's state of mind that he tried repeatedly to get her to visit a counselor immediately, but she refused. Maura decided to go home early from work, and the supervisor walked her to her front door. The supervisor characterized Maura as being in obvious distress and being very depressed. A family member later informed authorities that Kathleen's addiction had previously caused severe depression for Maura in the past. 2 days after her conversation with Kathleen, Maura's father, Fred, drove to Amherst to go car shopping with her. Fred met Maura and one of her friends for dinner at a brewery, followed by a visit to a liquor store. Fred returned to his hotel and lent Maura his vehicle for the evening so she could go back to her dorm for a party. She arrived at the party at approximately 10:30 p.m. and left at about 2:30 a.m. on Sunday the 8th. At 3:30 a.m. en route to her father's hotel, she hit a guardrail on Route 9 in Hadley, causing almost $10,000 worth of damage to her father's car. Police attending the accident did not breathalyze her or charge her for the accident and took her to her father's motel room where she stayed the night. At 4:49 a.m., a cell phone call was placed to her boyfriend Bill from Fred's phone. The participants and content of the phone call are unknown. When Maura woke up the following day, she told Fred about the accident, explaining that she had gone around a curve, hit a sand patch, and slid into the guardrail. Fred told his daughter she was fortunate not to be penalized for DUI and said that he would get a rental car while repairs were done to his damaged vehicle. Fred told authorities that the last time he saw his daughter, Maura was making whimpering sounds while in the car. At the motel, she said, "This is the worst. We went back to the dorm. She was feeling bad because she let me down. When we reached into the back seat to get her stuff, I told her it'll get fixed. She went into the dorm room and sort of slumped her way in." Fred subsequently discovered that his insurance would pay the cost of the damage as long as Maura picked up the required accident forms from the Registry of Motor Vehicles, which she promised her father she would do. At 11:30 p.m. that night, Fred contacted his daughter to remind her to get accident documents from the Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles. They decided to talk again on Monday night to review the documents and complete the insurance claim over the phone. Fred would never get to go over those forms with his daughter or speak to her ever again. On Monday, February 9th, after midnight, Maura used her computer to check MapQuest for routes to the Berkshires and Burlington in Vermont. Maura's first recorded communication with anybody on February 9th was at 1 p.m. when she emailed Bill Roche saying, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages, but honestly, I didn't feel like talking too much to anyone. I promised to call today though. Love you, Maura." She also called to inquire about renting a condominium at a condo association in Bartlett, New Hampshire, when she and her family had previously vacationed. According to telephone records, the call lasted 3 minutes. At 1:13 p.m., Maura contacted a fellow nursing student to arrange the return of borrowed clothes, which she later dropped off at the student's dorm. Maura then contacted the nursing school faculty's work supervisor that afternoon at 1:24 p.m., saying she would be out of town for a week due to a family death. She also said that she would contact them once she returned. This was a lie, because according to her family, the family had not experienced a death. Maura then called a recorded information hotline at 2:05 p.m. that provided information for booking hotels in Stowe, Vermont. This call lasted around 5 minutes. At 2:18 p.m., she called her boyfriend Bill and left a 1-minute voice message promising to speak later. Maura hurriedly packed clothing, toiletries, college textbooks, and birth control pills in her car, as well as packing her belongings into boxes and removing art from the walls of her dorm room. On top of the boxes was a printed email to her boyfriend, hinting at potential problems in their relationship. Around 3:30 p.m., Maura drove off the campus in her black 1996 Saturn sedan for the last time. Maura then stopped at an ATM in a Big Y Plaza in Hadley, Massachusetts at 3:15 p.m., withdrawing $280, nearly all the funds in her account. Surveillance stills from the ATM captured this moment and are the last photos taken of Maura. From the ATM, Maura went to Liquors 44, a liquor store in Hadley. According to the receipt, she returned 79 cans and bottles for $3.95, and state police say she bought a bottle of Kahlua, a bottle of vodka, a nip of Bailey's, and a 12-pack of Smirnoff Ice. The receipt shows that Maura left the liquor store at 3:43 p.m. after paying for her alcohol. At about 4 p.m., Maura went to the Hadley police station to pick up duplicate copies of the accident report forms as requested by her father. At 4:37 p.m., Maura made her last recorded call and checked her voicemail for 4 minutes. It is unknown who left the messages that she listened to. The next time Maura would pop up on the radar was nearly 3 hours later at 7:27 p.m. in Woodsville, New Hampshire. Sometime after 7 p.m., a Woodsville resident, Faith Westman, heard a loud thud outside her home. Through her window, she saw a vehicle stopped against a snowbank on Route 112, also known as Wild Amanusak Road. The car was facing west on the eastbound side of the road. The woman reported the accident to the Grafton County Sheriff's Department at 7:27 p.m. According to the 911 record, Faith reported seeing a male smoking a cigarette inside the car. However, she later reported that she did not see a man or a person smoking a cigarette, but rather a red light burning inside the car, possibly from a cell phone. Faith wasn't the only person to see Maura on the snow-logged Wild Amanusak Road that night. At 7:29 p.m., 2 minutes after Faith's call, Haverhill police officer Cecil Smith was dispatched to the accident scene. Smith's trip to the accident scene would take between 15 and 18 minutes. Another witness, Witness A, reports seeing a police SUV at Maura's car between 7:33 p.m. and 7:37 p.m., about 10 minutes before Officer Smith arrived. This eyewitness sighting raised significant questions regarding whether two cars were involved in Maura's accident or Officer Smith arrived sooner than officially documented. However, there is no evidence supporting Officer Smith's early arrival. Dispatch data, police reports, media sources, and Smith's route All show that he arrived at the scene at about 7:46 p.m. If this chronology is correct, it clearly implies that another vehicle was already on the site, parked nose to nose with Maura's car, around 10 minutes before Officer Smith arrived. This vehicle has never been identified. Then, a passing motorist, Butch Atwood, who lived within eyesight of the crash scene, noticed both the car and a young woman wandering around it. Butch noted that the young woman was not bleeding or physically harmed, but was noticeably cold, shivering, and maybe intoxicated. Butch offered his help by offering to phone for assistance, but Maura told him not to contact authorities and that she had already called AAA. When investigators later asked if this call had been made, representatives at AAA said they had no record of any such call. Knowing there was no cell phone coverage in the area, Butch left Maura by her vehicle, returned home, and contacted law enforcement. His call was logged by the sheriff's department at 7:43 p.m. Butch was unable to see Murray's car while making the call, but he did see numerous vehicles driving down the road before the police showed up. At 7:46 p.m., Sergeant Cecil Smith arrived on the scene. Evidence at the scene indicated the vehicle had been eastbound and had gone off the roadway, struck some trees, spun around, and come to rest facing the wrong way in the eastbound lane. Smith would write in his report, on February 15th, 6 days after the accident. Sergeant Smith approached Maura's vehicle and found it locked, but there was no trace of her. The driver's side windshield was damaged and both front airbags were deployed. Smith discovered a box of Franzia wine behind the driver's seat and a red liquid on the driver's door and ceiling. The wine box was damaged, possibly from the collision, and red streaks comparable to wine were discovered on the road. Smith also found a Coke bottle with a red liquid with a strong alcoholic odor. None of the other bottles of alcohol purchased by Maura at Liquor 44 were found in the vehicle. Other items discovered in Maura's vehicle were a AAA card, insurance documents, gloves, compact discs, cosmetics, computer-generated instructions to Burlington and Stowe in Vermont, and a book she was reading. Maura's cell phone and black bag were missing from the scene. Smith also discovered a rag stuffed into the tailpipe of Maura's Saturn. According to Maura's father, the cloth came from the trunk of her Saturn, where he had put it along with an emergency roadside kit. After checking the area around the Saturn, Smith visited Faith Westman and her husband to ask the couple what they had seen. Smith then went to Butch Atwood's house and found him sitting in his bus. Smith knocked on the bus window. He asked where the girl was, Atwood recalled, telling Smith that he hadn't seen anybody since leaving Maura at her car. At 7:56 p.m., 10 minutes after Smith arrived, EMS arrived, followed by a fire truck 1 minute later. Smith and Atwood drove down the road from the accident site, looking for Maura, but she was nowhere to be found. At noon the next day, Tuesday, February 10th, police issued a BOLO, or Be on the Lookout, for Maura Murray. By 5:17 p.m., Maura was referred to as missing by the Haverhill police. 12 hours later, the official search for Maura Murray started. Murray's disappearance has been dubbed the first crime mystery of the social media age, and has sparked speculation and countless theories in the media and among the public, particularly on the internet, in online forums and message boards. What are some of those theories, and do they have any substance behind them? Number 1. Her boyfriend Bill Roche is responsible for her disappearance. When a woman is murdered or disappears, it is almost a stereotype that her partner, boyfriend, love interest or husband is to blame. Bill Roche, Maura's boyfriend, is still to this day in the public eye regarding her unexplained disappearance. Although cleared by law enforcement, one true crime author believes Roche should be looked at more closely. For years, James Renner, the author of True Crime Addict, How I Lost Myself in the Mysterious Disappearance of Maura Murray, believed that Maura tried to leave the country and start a new life in Canada or Mexico. At the end of his book, Renner alleged that Maura's long-term boyfriend, Bill Roche, had been abusive towards her. He believed that when Maura discovered she was pregnant with Bill's or another man's baby, she hatched a plan to run away to start a new life. But who was this other man? Maura was apparently involved with Hussein Baghdadi, an assistant track coach at the University of Massachusetts, while still being in a long-distance relationship with Bill Roche. Renner posted on Reddit saying, "Lately I keep going back to my conversation with Hussein Baghdadi, one of the track coaches at UMass when Maura was running. He was very candid and admitted the affair about seeing Maura when she was on a break from Bill and for a little while when they were together. Hoss said Maura talked about running away, starting a new life, possibly in Mexico. To me, this is very important. It means he's either telling the truth, and that's exactly what she did, or he's lying. I tend to believe him for many reasons, the least of which is he didn't have a lot to gain by admitting the relationship, and because he has no history of ill will. If she didn't disappear on her own accord, we also have to believe that she told nobody about her drive into New Hampshire, otherwise they would have come forward after the disappearance and said, yeah, she was just driving up to the North Country to clear her head. I will never believe a young woman like Maura would leave without telling anyone, without leaving a note or an email for someone who might be concerned for her whereabouts. It's much more likely she did tell someone, her friends, and the only reason they would have to not share that contact is to protect her to this day. But why would Maura be afraid of Bill Roche? For some, this question was answered in 2019. Roche, now a US Army major, was charged on one count of felony third-degree sexual abuse for an alleged after-hours attack on a subordinate female employee in a downtown DC office building. Kate Patterson called the police the day after Roche attempted to force himself on her in the unoccupied office of Ray Group International, where they both worked in 2011. Patterson was 22 at the time, working her first job out of college, and Roche was her superior. The female Metropolitan Police Department officer's first response when she tried to report it was, according to Patterson, "Why didn't you report this last night?" It wasn't until 2017 that Patterson returned to the police, motivated by a call from a man looking into a missing person case from 2004 in New Hampshire. You guessed it, the Maura Murray case. The caller was James Renner. Roche was stationed at Fort Sill, Oklahoma on the night Murray vanished, and he has categorically denied any involvement in her disappearance. He has said on Twitter that he was granted leave to search for Murray after he found out she had gone missing. However, Renner has maintained his own unsubstantiated theory that Roche was involved in Maura's disappearance, which he discussed on his blog, which has since been removed due to severe trolling, according to Renner. Renner's theory proposes that Maura could have made it from the crash site to another location safely, where Bill connects with her by phone. Maura agrees to meet him, and he is responsible for her disappearance. Renner claims that other women who had read the blog and seen him talk about the case on a podcast contacted him to describe Roche's unpredictable and often violent conduct. 3 people who Patterson told about the attack soon after it happened have confirmed her account to a news outlet. 2 of those individuals, who were Patterson's colleagues at the time, characterized Roche's behavior toward women in the workplace, particularly toward Patterson, as demeaning and condescending. According to Patterson, Roche once told her that wearing jeans in the workplace was unprofessional and that she should wear skirts or dresses instead. In another Reddit post, Renner states, 4 other women have come forward with allegations of sexual harassment and abuse, but these incidents may be beyond the statute of limitation. One woman claims that in the fall of 2004, he choked her and said, "I'm going to kill you like I killed Maura Murray." Violence against other women does not prove that Roche had anything to do with his girlfriend's disappearance, but there are some unanswered questions and some strange behavior that will always keep him in the wings as a suspect. In a lengthy Reddit post called Things About Bill Roche, an unnamed user listed these questions and the strange behavior exhibited by Roche. The most pertinent being, when asked what flight he took to initially go out east when Maura went missing, the flight he gave did not exist. When confronted with that info, he suggested he perhaps had a layover that he cannot for the life of him remember. To this day, he refuses to share his flight plan. Bill Roche has never seen Maura's family since her disappearance. Bill's phone activity in the days leading up to Maura's disappearance showed days of way too many calls for someone on an army base, more like someone driving and bored for 2 days. Bill cheated on Maura with his ex-wife. Bill liked this woman so much he left the exact same base he was on when he was with Maura without permission from the military. He admits this to go see her in England. And people think he wouldn't be able to make it to Massachusetts undetected. Number 2. Maura's family believes she was abducted and killed. According to widespread belief by web sleuths and the Murray family, Maura was abducted by either an opportunistic predator or a serial killer. Fred Murray believes his daughter was abducted by a local person, or a local dirtbag as he has called people living in the area, who knows the region, where to go, and how to enter and exit without being noticed. Larry Moulton came forward in late 2004 with a knife that he thinks was used in Maura's murder. It belonged to his brother Claude, who lived approximately a mile away from the accident scene in an A-frame home. Claude had an extensive criminal record and was rumored to date girls much younger than him. By 2006, Claude had abandoned the house and the new owners had hired private detectives to investigate. Cadaver dogs were brought in and immediately picked up the scent of a decomposing body. Additionally, carpet samples from the apartment were collected for examination. Unfortunately, the samples were lost due to a lack of clarity in the chain of custody. The New Hampshire State Police were handed Moulton's knife, but the findings were never made public. In 2016, members of the podcast Missing Maura Murray returned to the A-frame home to see if they could find any evidence of Larry Moulton's accusations against his brother Claude. They saw what seemed to be blood streaks in a cabinet. A molecular geneticist examined the wood particles and discovered these streaks were human blood. Unfortunately, the samples were too degraded to establish whether the blood was Maura's. Another scenario that fits in with the belief that Maura was abducted is the opportunistic serial killer theory. This theory has 2 distinct sub-theories. The first one being is that a known serial killer was responsible for Maura's disappearance. Israel Keyes was an American serial killer, bank robber, burglar, arsonist, kidnapper, rapist, and necrophile who killed at least 3 people in the United States between June 2011 and February 2012. The FBI suspected Keyes of killing at least 11 people based on a note, drawings of skulls and Baphomet, and the word Corozal on the cell wall, all scrawled in Keyes' blood. But what possible ties might exist between Maura and Israel Keyes? The hypothesis is that after Murray was involved in her vehicle accident in 2004, Keyes abducted and killed her because he was in the area and came across her as a victim of opportunity. As a serial killer, Keyes chose victims who happened to cross his path rather than having a type. He often lurked in parks, cemeteries, and campgrounds, ready to accost people. Not as much to select from, in the sense of speaking. He admitted to law enforcement about his tactics, but there are also no witnesses. Basically, there's no one else around. According to some internet sleuths, there are 3 plausible connections between Keyes and Maura. Number 1. Maura passed through Keyes' hunting grounds. Maura's trips across New Hampshire placed her in an ideal position to be happened upon by Keyes, who had no qualms about traveling vast distances in search of victims. Keyes told police he once rented a car and drove over 900 miles to the rural town of Essex, Vermont, where he shot Bill Currier, 50, and assaulted and strangled his wife, Lorraine, 55. Number 2. Israel was traveling the week Maura went missing. On the day Maura disappeared, Keyes was in Utah, where he had rented a silver Volkswagen Jetta that, according to the rental agreement, was not allowed to leave the state. We know he couldn't have used this rental car to get to New Hampshire, where Maura was last seen, since he only clocked up over 500 kilometers between February 6th and February 13th. Many believers in the serial killer theory think Keyes drove to and from a small airport before boarding an aircraft to the East Coast, allowing him enough time to return to Utah when Maura went missing. Number 3. In October 2004, Keyes was rumored to be in New Hampshire. The fact that the FBI put Keyes in Manchester, New Hampshire from October 6th to 16th, 2004, barely 8 months after Murray's disappearance, is perhaps the most fascinating and little-known detail linking him to the disappearance. Was Keyes paying a second visit to a murder scene? The Israel Keyes connection to Maura's disappearance is a stretch, but the second sub-theory involves an epidemic of serial murder that until recently wasn't even on the public's radar. According to the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative, long-haul truck drivers are suspected of being responsible for at least 850 murders in the United States in the past few decades. The FBI project helps correlate homicides that seem unrelated but follow a pattern of female victims, many of whom are engaged in prostitution or sex trafficking, being picked up at truck stops, sexually abused, and then slain, with their remains discarded in various areas. The FBI is confident the 850 killings are the work of serial killers. Frank Filiuzzi, a former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, said, "In fact, there are already 25 long-haul truckers who are in prison for multiple homicides." He went on to explain that 200 homicides are still unsolved, with 450 people being investigated for these murders. Was Maura picked up by one of these long-haul serial killers? This theory, just like the Israel Keyes theory, is a bit of a stretch. Surely, with witnesses seeing her just before she disappeared, they would have noticed a large long-haul truck on the wild Ammonoosuc Road that night. So what do we think happened to Maura on the night she disappeared? To get a clear picture of the most likely explanation of what happened to Maura, we must look at her state of mind, what was happening in her life at the time, and most importantly, logic. Given that it is unknown if a crime took place in this case, it can be helpful to conduct a psychological profile to better understand the mindset and lifestyle of Maura, to conceptualize the why and how of her disappearance. Regardless of what happened to Maura, we can all agree that she showed signs of extreme stress before her disappearance. She was distraught, overwhelmed, covert, anxious and impulsive, and not telling anyone her actual destination or why she was leaving was a sign of this. Maura showed some warning signs of wanting to run away, harm herself, or end her life. Some of these signs include: she was so secretive about her plans that no one to date knows where she was headed or why. She returned borrowed clothes to a fellow student right before leaving the university, knowing she wasn't returning. She packed up all her belongings in her dorm room. She left behind a printed email from a conversation with Roche that showed problems in their relationship. Maura was headed toward a personal, meaningful destination, the White Mountains, which may have held emotional comfort for her. She also tried to book a room at a familiar family vacation site that may have held positive or calming memories for her. Maura was exhibiting many of the symptoms of hypomania and was at an age where it is normal for women to have their first symptomatic breakthroughs in bipolar disorder. Hypomania is a condition in which you experience excessively high and dramatic variations in your mood or emotions, energy level or activity level. Her impulsivity and recklessness, which are indicators of hypomania, were shown by credit card fraud, shoplifting, car accidents, lying, excessive drinking, mood swings, and cognitive impairments. There are also several indications that Maura comes from a family steeped in alcoholic codependent behaviors. Kathleen, her elder sister, has a confessed long history of alcoholism that has resulted in multiple trips to treatment facilities. This codependency is evident in Maura's state of mind after the call from her sister, with her supervisor characterizing her as being in obvious distress, almost catatonic, and being very depressed. Just looking at a simple timeline of events in her life before her disappearance shows where her stress came from. Credit card fraud, shoplifting, relationship problems, 2 car crashes in 2 days, her sister's alcohol dependency problems, and suspected mental difficulties is a lot for any 21-year-old woman to deal with. Now that we have outlined the why, let us look at how it most likely happened. Let's pick up the story from just after Maura left the Hadley police station after picking up the accident report forms at 4 p.m. When Faith heard the accident on her road, 3.5 hours had passed since Maura's last sighting at the police station. We think it's safe to say that in these 3+ hours, Maura had been drinking while driving. When comparing what alcohol she bought at Liquor 44, a bottle of Kahlua, a bottle of vodka, a nip of Baileys and a 12-pack of Smirnoff Ice, to what was found in her car, an empty Smirnoff Ice bottle, a damaged box of red wine, and a Diet Coke bottle reportedly filled with red wine, it's easy to surmise that she had been binge drinking. Maura, under the influence and most likely in an emotional state, took a hairpin bend in slippery conditions and ploughed her car into a tree, pushing the car's radiator into the fan, rendering it inoperable. This was Maura's second accident in 2 days, both while intoxicated. Knowing full well that any interaction with law enforcement would lead to a breathalyzer and arrest, Maura refused help when Butch Atwood offered to call the police. Once Atwood had left her by the disabled car, Maura's mind began racing. 2 accidents in 2 days. I've been drinking. I'm on a probation to stay out of trouble, and now I can't get away from it all, she must have been thinking. This is a widely held belief for many people following the case and theories of what happened to Maura. One anonymous Redditor posted, "Also, it has to be accounted for that she was clearly in mental distress leading up to this trip. Not necessarily suicide, but certainly in a condition that could easily lead her to make irrational and impulsive decisions, like say running off into the woods to avoid the cops after getting in a drunk driving accident. Clearly, she was not operating rationally, and too many people investigating this case lose sight of this fact. So what did Maura do? She did what she did best: run. But where to? James Renner, the author we mentioned earlier, thinks he may have an idea. 31 miles from where she had her accident, the University of Massachusetts maintains and runs a property called the Outing Club. The Outing Club was well known to Maura, her coach and allegedly lover, Hussein Baghdadi. The Outing Club was used for University of Massachusetts sports teams to train or team build. Maura, although in a diminished mental state, thought she was close to the Outing Club and could maybe seek refuge there until everything blew over. Maura took off on foot towards what she thought would be an easy walk to the Outing Club. This view may be reinforced by a sighting that could have been her, but was only reported 3 months after her disappearance. Between 8 and 8:30 p.m., a contractor heading home from Franconia saw a young person walking rapidly eastward on Route 112, roughly 4 to 5 miles east of where Murray's car was recovered. He observed that the individual wore jeans, a dark coat and a light-colored hood. He did not report this sighting to authorities right away, owing to his misunderstanding of dates, learning 3 months later while examining his work records that he had seen the young person the same night Maura vanished. What Maura didn't count on was how dangerous it was being out in the frigid weather that night. No doubt the web sleuths would investigate the weather conditions that night, and ACDC on Reddit came up with the following. I decided to do some research on the weather the night Maura Murray disappeared. It was said that the night Maura disappeared wasn't cold, but the weather underground disagrees. Let me explain. First thing we know is that Maura was headed east on 112. Now, the night Maura disappeared, the temperatures fluctuated between 27 Fahrenheit to 23 Fahrenheit. When she had her accident, the temperature was between 27 Fahrenheit to 25 Fahrenheit. These temperatures are below freezing, and thus someone could suffer from hypothermia in these conditions. When you add the fact that the wind was blowing in a westerly direction, coupled with the fact Maura was traveling east and would have continued on foot, it's obvious that had Maura continued on foot heading east, she would have been facing below freezing temperatures and having the wind against her. Also, if Maura had been drinking, the blood vessels near her skin would have dilated and thus she would have lost significant heat due to her intoxication. Based on the ATM videos, we can tell Maura was wearing a jacket. What we can't tell, however, is what she was wearing on her feet. If Maura was walking against the wind, there's a good chance she had blowing snow in her face, which would have brought down her body temperature and kept her from seeing very well. It's possible she could have ventured into the woods to avoid the wind and blowing snow, and then got lost. It's also entirely possible that she slipped and fell and hurt herself. If she was drinking, her motor skills would have been diminished. Let me know what you think. Maura was up against the wall and underestimated the treacherous weather conditions that night, and she most likely knew it. Hypothermia was kicking in, and Maura was in trouble. She needed shelter. AC/DC expanded on what she might have done, realizing the predicament she was in by posting, "Yes, in fact, I would say the most probable theory aside from the abduction theory is the death by misadventure. The problem with Maura's case is that there was too much misinformation on the internet and in news reports. Had people taken the time to check the actual weather patterns that night, it leads to a whole other outcome." If Maura did keep going on foot east on 112, she would have definitely have either looked for shelter within less than an hour, and if shelter wasn't available, she would have gone into the woods, probably near a valley or some enclosure where the ground is lower, to keep the cold blowing snow and air off of her. If she did this, it's entirely possible she kept drinking till she passed out and died from hypothermia. Possible locations she would have been seeking shelter include bridges, abandoned sheds, buildings, or the forest. Of course, I don't believe this to be the case, but it's entirely possible. Many times when someone suffers from hypothermia, their minds will play tricks on them, and they will actually remove items of clothing, thinking that they are warmer without the item of clothing. This is especially the case when someone's clothing has become wet. For example, if her feet got wet, which they most likely did if she walked, she would have removed her socks. If her pants were wet, she would have removed them, etc. It's a reflex that doesn't make sense, but by this time, the person would be in shock and their actions wouldn't make much sense, especially if she was also intoxicated. It's possible Maura met her end with a series of poor decisions on her end, unfortunately. AC/DC's undressing theory is called hypothermia undressing and is one of the strangest aspects of our video. Researcher is 100% sure this is what happened at Dyatlov Pass. This paradoxical behavior would have certainly led to Maura's death within an hour or so in the below freezing weather. If Maura died from overexposure, surely her body would have been found by now. The number of searches carried out to find Maura is staggering. New Hampshire State Police and New Hampshire Fish and Game conducted 5 searches in 2004. The New Hampshire League of Investigators conducted 3 wide-ranging searches, the first in 2006. Friends and family searched for the first few weeks after Maura's disappearance. A team involving Fred Murray, Rick Graves, and others searched every weekend for the first year. Boots on the Ground veteran organization has been conducting annual searches since 2017, but all of these searches have been in vain. Contrary to popular belief, searching for a corpse isn't as easy as seen in the movies. RNH213PDX hit the nail on the head when they posted on Reddit saying, "I encourage you to visit this area of the United States. I don't think people from afar can appreciate the density and all-consuming nature of these woods. It makes perfect sense to me that someone can enter the woods and never be seen again." Another anonymous poster concurred and gave an example of how easy it is to miss human remains during a search. Not finding her doesn't mean she is not in the woods. If you look at other cases who had experienced searchers with dogs and everything else, they have missed remains. I remember just a few years ago was a jogger who had went missing on a running trail, and they did search after search of the trail with dogs, and helis could not find him. Months went by before another jogger stumbled across human remains under a tree just off the trail. The dead jogger had probably been feeling unwell or tired and took refuge under the tree next to the trail. I do think Maura might be in the woods, not that far away from her car. just given how close other missing people are eventually found from their cars, etc. That said, she was pretty fit, so she may have gotten further than we give her credit for. In 2021, the Murray family got news that they had been hoping they would get for years. On September 14, 2021, the New Hampshire State Police revealed that bone fragments had been discovered by construction workers on Loon Mountain in Lincoln, New Hampshire, some 25 miles east of Maura's crash scene. Maura had visited the mountain before and was familiar with the area, according to her sister. The fragments were characterized as pretty small, and the identification of the remains was likely to take at least 2 months. The situation is pretty remarkable, Lance Reinstierner, one of the hosts of the Missing Maura podcast, would say. We have seen this happen in the past, these moments where something is found, or a promising tip comes in, but it turns out to be fruitless. This, however, has a different feel to it. Julie Murray echoed this sentiment, saying, "We're still not sure how old the bones are or the gender, so it's still sort of up in the air, but this one feels different." Unfortunately, these sentiments were proven wrong when DNA test results came back. The bones did not belong to Maura. It's been 2 decades since Maura disappeared, but interest in her case doesn't seem to be waning. New theories, suspects, podcasts, and accusations ignite new interest to the case. Here at Bad Things, we think that the most logical explanation is the right one. To quote a Midwestern man on Reddit, "She panicked, ran into the woods, and died from the elements. Nothing more." Leave us a comment below telling us what your theory is.